Dang, the SMU game just went final, and Virginia will be facing off with Duke in the ACC Championship game. That is one of the weirdest sentences I've ever heard, especially considering the fact that Duke has lost 5 games, and college football has been flipped on its head. But what's getting lost in the shuffle is how impressive of a season Virginia has had. For being a team that was at the bottom of the Power 4, and many thought would pretty much never do anything again, they have reeled off quite an impressive season as they've won over 10 games, Tony Elliott has saved his job, and if Virginia can just win one more game, they will go to the college football playoff. They are definitely one of the feel-good stories of the 2025 season, and today we're going to talk about the complete rebuild of Virginia football. From the dark days to the Tony Elliott rebuild, how good they've been this season, and where they could still go. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about the rise of Virginia football. Okay, so before we get started, I want to bring you up to speed on the history of Virginia football. Their first season was in 1887, and in total, they've gone 688, 643, and 48. That's a bit above 500. They are 8-13 when it comes to bowl games, and they have 5 conference titles, all of which came before the year 2000. The last time they made it to the division title was back in 2019 with Bryce Perkins as their quarterback. And no offense to Virginia, but they're just not exactly known as a big-time football school. They are way more focused on academics, or in the last decade or so, basketball. A few years ago when I was traveling through the area, I got a chance to walk on the campus and see the stadium, and I thought it was cool, and I always felt like Charlottesville could be a bit of a sleeping giant in college football. Let's flash forward to the year 2010 though. Mike London was made the head coach of the Cavaliers, and in his first season he ended up going 4-8. London ended up showing he had potential as a coach, as in year 2, Virginia ended up going 8-5, where they would eventually lose in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. This is one of the better seasons that Virginia football had had in quite some time, but Mike London was never able to figure things out in Charlottesville. He went 4-8 in 2012, 2-10 in 2013, and then 5-7 in 2014. How he was not fired after those 3 seasons is pretty much beyond me, and somehow he was given a 6th year, and Virginia would end up going 4-8. Looking back on ESPN at the statistics during those seasons, they just didn't have many good players. Grayson Lambert was actually a quarterback for 1 year before he ended up going to Georgia. Matt Johns was a quarterback, David Watford was a quarterback, and none of those names really popped off the page. Their best player was probably Olamide Zaccheaus, and he only got to Virginia at the tail end of the Mike London era. Virginia's problem was obviously talent, and it seemed like there wasn't a lot of fan support. I also questioned some of the leadership decisions, as I don't know how Mike London got as much time as he did. London was the coach from 2010 to 2015, and he made 1 bowl game in 6 years and never won over 8 games. To me, that is unbelievable. In 2016, though, Virginia knew they had to make a decent hire to get things turned around, and they would go get a guy by the name of Bronco Mendenhall. Mendenhall had quite the track record as a head coach, as he was at BYU for over 10 years. During his time as the head coach for the Cougars, he ended up going 99-43, and he literally made a bowl game every single season he was a head coach. The Cougars were also ranked in 5 of those seasons, and he seemed like the perfect guy to fix Virginia football. Honestly, looking back, I'm not sure why he ever left for Virginia, but it seemed like his fit at BYU was always somewhat unique. Yeah, he would arrive at Virginia for the 2016 college football season, but the cupboard was bare. Mendenhall did find a decent quarterback though, as Kurt Benkirk would take over as the starting quarterback for them, but it started out really rough for him. The team ended up going 2-10 in 2016 with an opening season loss against Richmond. I mean, that was absolutely terrible for them, but still, it was his first year. They also ended up losing to UConn and got obliterated by their rival Virginia Tech. They went 2-10 with a 1-7 mark in the conference in 2016, but 2017 would prove to slowly be a different story for Virginia. Benkirk was once again back at quarterback, and Zaccheaus became their top receiver, and Virginia football finally started to figure things out. They ended up winning 5 of their first 6 games as they beat William & Mary, UConn, Boise State, Duke, and North Carolina. Their only loss was a game against Indiana that year, and Mendenhall had them at 5-1 in mid-October. Unfortunately, they would lose 5 of their last 6 regular season games, but they would beat Georgia Tech on November 4th, getting them to bowl eligibility. They'd end up playing against Navy in the Military Bowl, where they got killed 49-7. Sure, they didn't finish the season great, but Bronco Mendenhall had gotten them back to a bowl game in just his 2nd year, and that's exactly what Virginia football fans wanted. The bar was just getting to a bowl game. Looking ahead to the 2018 season, Virginia had to find a new quarterback, and Mendenhall found his guy in former Arizona State transfer Bryce Perkins. Bryce Perkins had infamously broken his neck at Arizona State, so that was scary and also somewhat risky. He was an extremely good player though, and he would actually really help out Virginia football in 2018. Perkins would end up passing for nearly 3,000 yards and 25 touchdowns, and him and Jordan Ellis were incredible on the ground. This would help Virginia out a lot, as they once again start out good. They won 6 of their first 8 games, including an upset over number 16 Miami. They had losses to both NC State and Indiana, and to finish the season they would lose 3 of 4, but they were close. 2 of their losses were in overtime to both Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech, and Virginia had gone 7-5 with a 4-4 mark in the conference. They ended up playing against South Carolina in the Belk Bowl, where they would end up winning 28-0. In year 3 under Bronco Mendenhall, the team went 8-5 with a 4-4 mark in the conference. This was a big step, but the biggest step would come in 2019, as Virginia football now ended up making it to the ACC title game. The Cavs ended up going 9-3 in the regular season, with their losses coming against Notre Dame, Miami, and Louisville. They ended up infamously knocking off number 24 Virginia Tech in a thrilling game, and then they would face off with number 3 Clemson in the ACC title game. They would get killed 62-17, but Virginia playing in the ACC title was unbelievable. They did have some talented players on the roster, as they had Bryce Perkins, Brennan Armstrong, Wayne Talapapa, Mike Hollins, and Hassis Dubois. Mendenhall was now starting to build Virginia football into a decent brand, but unfortunately, that was the peak. Virginia football has not been the same since that 2019 season, and now we're going to talk about their downfall. The last few years of the Bronco Mendenhall era were defined by good quarterback play, and that was about it. Brennan Armstrong would end up becoming the starting quarterback for the team in 2020, and he put up a ton of yards while he was there, but unfortunately they just weren't able to win as many games. In 2020, which was a weird year in college football, the Cavs ended up going 5-5, with their wins coming against North Carolina, Louisville, Abilene Christian, Boston College, and Duke. They were not able to beat the best teams on their schedule, and that is sort of how things would remain in 2021. Despite getting off to a 6-2 start, they'd end up losing their last 4 games and settle on a 6-6 record. That was despite Brennan Armstrong being one of the top quarterbacks in all of college football statistically. Then they were supposed to play in the Fenway Bowl against SMU, but that ended up being canceled. This would also prove to be the end of the Bronco Mendenhall era, as after the season was over, Mendenhall would elect to resign from the Virginia head coaching position. He said, quote, "I've been a head coach for 17 years in a row, and it's been 31 straight years of football. My wife and I have been married 25 years in March, and all we've known is the rhythm of the football season. There was no pressure from the administration to step down, but it seemed like Bronco Mendenhall was sort of burning out, and he needed to take some time away." This meant Virginia now had to find a new football coach who could build upon what Mendenhall was able to accomplish there. So what would Virginia decide to do? Well, they honestly made a somewhat risky hire, as they decided to get Tony Elliott. Tony Elliott had spent the last 11 seasons as an assistant on Dabo Swinney's staff at Clemson, and was sort of one of those names that had quickly been flying up the coaching radar. He ended up becoming the offensive coordinator for the Tigers at one point, and was seen as someone who would eventually take a head coaching job, but not maybe a power forward job right away. But Elliott was a part of one of the winningest stretches in college football history at Clemson, as they ended up winning 2 national championships and sent countless players off to the NFL. Elliott had no head coaching experience, and winning football at Virginia would be different than just being an offensive coordinator at Clemson. Personally, at the time, I was not huge on the hire, as I just didn't think Elliott was the guy for the job, or that he was even ready for it. But I'm just an idiot on YouTube, so what do I know about anything? Either way, he'd end up having his work cut out for him, as in his first year, he'd be gifted a good quarterback in Brennan Armstrong, and then he'd return a couple of good players, including Keaton Thompson, Dontavian Wicks, and Lavelle Davis Jr. at running back. Virginia on paper was supposed to have a good offense, but the season took many unexpected turns. Virginia would end up winning their first game against Richmond, before then losing on the road to Illinois. After barely squeaking by Old Dominion 16-14, losing would start. They dropped 3 straight games to Syracuse, Duke, and Louisville, and the only win the rest of the season would come against Georgia Tech 16-9. They would almost knock off Miami, but they lost in 4 overtimes, and in the finish of the year, they'd lose to North Carolina and Pittsburgh. The team ended up going 3-7 with a 1-6 mark in the conference, but wait, there were supposed to be 2 extra games. In late November of 2022, we had one of the most horrific incidents that's happened in college football in recent memory, as 3 Virginia football players ended up losing their life. They ended up getting shot and killed on campus, and those guys were Lavelle Davis Jr., Devin Chandler, and Deshaun Perry. The shooting would take place on a charter bus after the students had returned from campus after a fall trip, and this was unbelievably devastating and heartbreaking for everybody. After this incident, it felt like Virginia's football season was actually over, and they would decide to cancel the rest of their games. The matchups against both Coastal Carolina and Virginia Tech would not happen, and I don't think anybody could necessarily blame them. This was a terrible tragedy, and something that Coach Elliott probably never thought he'd have to deal with in his first year. It was definitely a very difficult and trying year both on and off the field for the Cavaliers, as I said, the team ended up going 3-7 with a 1-6 mark in the conference, and Tony Elliott would have to pull everyone together and get the football program back on track. The 2023 season would not be a whole lot different than his first season though, as he tried to bring in Monmouth transfer Tony Muskett at quarterback, but he ended up flaming out, and Anthony Colandrea, a true freshman, would end up taking over. He threw for 2,000 yards and 13 touchdowns, and both Malik Washington and Malachi Fields would break out at the receiver spot. As I said, this didn't lead to many wins though, as they get blown out in their first game against number 12 Tennessee, and then lose a crazy upset against James Madison. They'd lose 3 more against Maryland, NC State, and Boston College before they get their first win of the season in early October. That would come against William & Mary. They then pulled off a shocker, knocking off number 10 North Carolina on the road, which became the biggest win of the Tony Elliott era. The season would not end up finishing strong though, as they lose 4 of their last 5 to Miami, Georgia Tech, Louisville, and Virginia Tech. Their only win would come against Duke, and the team would go 3-9 with a 2-6 mark in the conference. In the first 2 years of the Elliott era, things just did not go according to plan. It seemed like 2024 was going to be a bit different though, and to some degree it was. Colandrea was back at the quarterback spot, former Clemson transfer Kobe Pace had taken over at running back, and Malachi Fields was once again back at the receiver spot. Virginia this time would win their first 2 games, including a road victory over Wake Forest, and they would start out 2-0. They then ended up blowing it to Maryland in week 3, but then after wins against Coastal Carolina and Boston College, Virginia was now 4-1 with a 2-0 mark in the conference. It seemed like 2024 was going to be the breakout season for Virginia, but then at a pivotal moment, things all fell apart. After a close loss to Louisville, they then continued to lose. They got blown out by number 10 Clemson, blown out by North Carolina, blown out by Notre Dame, blown out by SMU, and blown out by Virginia Tech. Their only win came on the road against number 18 Pittsburgh, which sort of ended Pitt's season, and if you do the math, the record was 5-7 with a 3-5 mark in the conference. Virginia had now missed a bowl game for the 3rd straight year, and some were wondering how Tony Elliott was still around. But I still think the incident that happened in year 1 is the reason why Elliott was given a 4th season, and so far, it has definitely paid off for them. I was looking through Reddit yesterday, and people were talking about why Virginia football all of a sudden has gotten good this year. Some are saying because they finally poured money into the program, some are saying it's because they finally have a good quarterback, and others are saying it's partially just luck. I think honestly those are the 3 reasons why Virginia football is good this year, and let's first start with the first one, money. It seems like in this modern world of college athletics, schools are trying to prioritize football. I mean, it seems obvious, but some of these schools that are super academically oriented sometimes don't put the time or resources needed for a successful football program. It seems like Virginia is now trying with their NIL, is trying to get fans at the games, and overall is trying to support the football team. Secondly, they finally got a good quarterback, as the guy they brought in was someone by the name of Chandler Morris. Coming out of the state of Texas, he was the son of former head coach at Arkansas, Chad Morris, and he was a blue-chip recruit who arrived at Oklahoma. He ended up flaming out with the Sooners, and then spent some time at TCU. Morris was an on and off starter with Max Duggan there, before he then took over as the starter at North Texas in 2024. He was near the top of college football last year, throwing for nearly 4,000 yards and 31 touchdowns, and for his final year of eligibility, he would elect to go to Virginia. A lot of people honestly rolled their eyes when they heard that, and he was one of the least talked about transfer quarterbacks in the country. But Virginia had gotten their guy, and someone who had played a lot of college football and put up a lot of yards. They needed that. Thirdly, they have finally had some luck. They lost so many close games during those first 3 years of the Elliott era, and now it just seems like the script is now in their favor. In week 1, they would play against Coastal Carolina, winning 48-7. In week 2, they faced off with NC State on the road, and for some reason these conference teams keep scheduling non-conference games, but this would not count in ACC play. Chandler Morris had a chance to win the game late, but ended up throwing a really bad interception, and Virginia lost 35-31, and that seemingly was a turning point in their season. Were they going to be the same old Virginia football team that crumbles and fall apart, or were they going to bounce back and keep fighting? It obviously was the latter, as after that, they have been a different team. They ended up blowing out William & Mary 55-16, killed Stanford 48-20, and then would come home on a Friday night to face off with number 8 Florida State. Honestly, this was the biggest game at Virginia in my opinion since they played against Virginia Tech in 2019, and Charlottesville was amped up for this one. The game would end up going back and forth, and while both sides ended up making plenty of mistakes, Virginia made less. The game ended up going to double overtime, and after one last stop, the entire stadium ran on the field right when the play was incomplete, and it made for one of the best pictures in college football this year. Virginia had now knocked off a top 10 Florida State team, and the hype was now going to be unreal for them. They would jump into the AP poll this past weekend as they were ranked number 24 in the country, ahead of a matchup with an undefeated Louisville team. While the Cardinals were not ranked, they are one of just a few unbeatens left in college football, and it is tough to beat Jeff Brom and the Cardinals. Was Virginia football going to be legit, or were they going to fall apart right when they were starting to get hype? Well, the game ended up being close, and this one also went to overtime, but after Chandler Morris literally put his entire body on the line, backup quarterback Daniel Kalen came in, had a direct snap to the running back, and he'd go in for the eventual game-winning touchdown, giving them a 30-27 victory. While it could have just been a flash in the pan for the first 6 games of the season, Virginia has continued on. The following week, they would face off against Washington State, who was really bad some weeks and really competitive other weeks, and after being down, they would come back and force a late safety, and they would win 22-20. They escaped, 6-1 with a 3-0 mark in the conference. Following that, they'd face off against North Carolina, and in another close game, they'd only win 17-16 in overtime. It didn't matter though. Virginia football was still rolling, and then they'd go beat Cal on the road by 10. Unfortunately, they'd have a setback in early November, as Chandler Morris was out against Wake Forest, and they ended up losing 16-9. This could have been it for the season, but Virginia kept going. They went on the road and beat Duke 34-17 last week, and now they'll get a chance to play them again. After playing against Virginia Tech in their rivalry matchup, they would win this game 27-7, and it was never really in doubt, and Virginia finished with a 10-2 record and a 7-1 mark in the ACC. Because of all the weird stuff that happened with Miami, SMU, and others, somehow, someway, the Duke Blue Devils will face off against Virginia in the ACC title, and if Virginia can win that game, they'll definitely get a spot in the 2025 college football playoff, which would be absolutely absurd. Obviously, Virginia has never gotten to the college football playoff, and for the most part, they've never really been relevant. Tony Elliott isn't a name being considered for a lot of job openings, but maybe it should. Maybe he's a lot better than people are giving him credit for, and the 2025 regular season was super special, and Virginia has a chance to continue their storied season. Virginia would not have been able to do any of this without their star quarterback Chandler Morris, who has thrown for 2,400 yards and 14 touchdowns, and has also ran for 4 more. He's one of the most gutsy quarterbacks I've ever seen, and for a guy who was written off at pretty much every other school, he's really made something of himself, and this is super awesome to watch. Transfer Jamari Taylor has been one of the better backs in the ACC, rushing for 917 yards and 13 touchdowns, and I'm sure he'll get a chance to cross the 1,000-yard mark. Terrell Harris, Jamal Edgerrin, and Cam Ross have been a 3-headed monster at the receiver spot, and Virginia has done everything right. They have a good defense, they found a way to win close games, and they've taken advantage of the schedule they were given. To me, this is super special, and I've always found myself cheering for Virginia, and I hope they get a chance to go to the playoff and make a run. But what do you guys think? If you're a Virginia fan, how did you guys turn it around? Do you think you'll make the college football playoff? And what team should I profile next? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.